That's the fundamental metaphor at the bottom of his political message. I gave the order to burn down to the raw flesh, Jesus, the ulcers of this poisoning of the wells. Yeah, pretty rough, man. This is the battle against a veritable world sickness which threatens to infect the peoples, a plague which devastates whole peoples, an international pestilence. The international carrier of the bacillus must be fought. It is if within this community one state is infected, that infection is decisive for all. In Europe, no common life of the nations is possible when amongst their number there are some who are suffering from a poisonous infection and who openly profess their desire to infect others with the same disease. We shall have a very real interest in seeing to it that the Bolshevist plague does not spread over Europe. National Socialism has made our people, and therefore the Reich, immune from a Bolshevik infection. I'll read you one more, although obviously you get the point. Table 7 is called "The National Body is Being Consumed." The Jew is and remains the typical parasite, a sponger who, like a noxious bacillus, keeps spreading as soon as a favorable medium invites him. All right, now I want to show you a brief film. And you can look here at the what would you call it, artistic and propagandistic transformation of the idea of order into a politicized message. And the thing that's so interesting about Hitler's particular brand of fascism, it wasn't precisely it wasn't precisely a movement that was predicated on ideas, like communism. Communism is predicated on ideas. But the Nazis went at it with something that wasn't really in the realm of idea. It was more in the realm of like embodied disgust and image. And so it was also very much more difficult to fight against from the ideational perspective. You know, it wasn't a well-developed intellectual movement. It was an embodied movement. And Hitler was extraordinarily good at using the metaphors and the images, and then his incredible capacity for propagandistic display to fire people up at a level of analysis that they weren't really even aware of. So let's take a look at this film.
The campaign in Poland gave us the opportunity to really get to know the Jewish people. Nearly 4 million Jews live here in Poland, but they won't be found among the rural population, nor have they suffered from the chaos of war as has the native Pole. They set it out indifferently in the gloomy streets of the Polish ghetto. Yet within an hour after the German occupation, they were back in business. We Germans had a look at the Polish ghetto 25 years ago. This time our eyes are sharpened by our experience in the last few decades. Unlike in 1914, we no longer see just the most grotesque and comical of these questionable ghetto figures. This time we recognize that there's a plague here, a plague that threatens the health of the Aryan peoples. Richard Wagner once said, "The Jew is the demon behind the corruption of mankind." And these pictures prove it. Jewish home life reveals remarkable lack of creative ability to civilize. In plain language, Jewish dwellings are filthy and neglected. These Jews aren't at all poor. After decades of business, they've hoarded enough to acquire decent, comfortable homes. But they live for generations in the same dirty and bug-ridden dwellings. Untroubled by their surroundings, they go right on with their prayers. The bobbing motion is part of the ritual for reading Jewish scriptures. The main part of Jewish so-called community life takes place in the street.
The connection with trade, you see what's going on in the, okay, so with the juxtaposition of those two films, you see the juxtaposition of order versus chaos. And so part of the order versus chaos archetype obviously is rooted in the dichotomy between disgust and purity. It's not the only axis of opposition between order and chaos. And then, so this is all the invocation of archetypal chaos, and it starts with the use of the disease imagery, and then also the use of music composed in a minor key and threatening and low, right? So that's all juxtaposed together. And then they switch to trade again with this undertone of threat, and there's a hand-to-hand exchange of goods. And it seems to me that they're using the image to continue the metaphor that in this situation, trade is associated with contamination rather than with productivity, right? And so you can see obviously a dichotomy with regards to trade, because when you're taking goods from someone else, the question is, are the goods of high quality and useful, and are they useful, or are they something that is going to introduce a foreign element or an unexpected element into your house? And so this film is obviously taking that ambivalence that's associated with trade and placing it into the chaos order archetype and then associating it with disgust. So it's very, very sneaky. And it's done by inference rather than directly, which I think is a much more powerful way of doing this sort of thing. And one of the things that's interesting too is that, you can imagine that if you're seeing people who are poor and downtrodden, that might evoke two possible sets of responses. One might be a compassionate response, and that would be the desire to help, right? And the other would be the desire to distance yourself. Of course, you feel the same thing. For example, if you're walking down Bloor and you find somebody who's, a completely wrecked street person lying there in their sleeping bag in a doorway, it's like, well, what's your response going to be? Is it compassion, or is it fear? Is it disgust? Well, it's going to depend on your mood and all sorts of other things. It's going to depend on the particulars of the situation. It's going to depend on your temperament. But you can see that those two things, they're both automatically evocable responses, and it isn't self-evident which one is going to come to the fore, nor is it always self-evident which one should come to the fore, because part of the reason that you're ambivalent about a situation like that is because you have no idea what would happen even if you did choose to interact. And so you can't just simply, what would you say? There's no simple way of solving a problem like that. And so that's why there's a war of competing emotions when you're in a situation like that. But you could imagine as well, you could have taken the same images and put them to different music and used a different overlay, and it could have been a call to compassion. But that's not what it is here. It's a call to contempt and extermination. Because that's also another danger of, I suppose, insisting upon the fact that a given population is victimized. I suppose that might be one way of thinking about it, because there's two different sets of categorical responses to people who are at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy, and one of them is compassion, but the other one is more like this. It's not necessarily something that you want to carelessly evoke.
One might want to regard these haggling children as a sign of great poverty. But watch them a while, and it becomes clear that they're proud to act as their grown-ups do. These young people don't have the idealism that ours do. With them, the egoism of the individual is not in the service of higher common goals. Instead, Jewish morality, in crass contradiction of the Aryan concept of ethics, proclaims the unrestrained egoism of every Jew to be divine law. His religion makes cheating and usury a duty. In the 5th book of Moses, for example, it is stated that a non-Jew thou may loan to upon usury, but not thy brother. That the Lord may bless thee in all thy dealings. For the Jews, then, doing business is something holy. This is totally incomprehensible to non-Jews. Aryan man attaches a sense of worth to every activity. He wants to create something worthwhile, food or clothing, houses or machines.
Yeah, so there's a contrast there. They actually use a contrast there between industrious and non-industrious too, which is quite interesting.
Works of art or anything else of value to everyone. He's ruled by the feeling of being responsible for his achievements. For the Jew, there's but one thing of value: money. How he gets it makes no difference. The first trade goods are generally worthless trash of all sorts. That's how the little Jews start out. Soon they reach the point where they can sell from a tray, and before long they've assembled a complete line of goods. Not long after, they own a regular stand. The most ambitious soon own a small shop and then a bigger shop. The most cunning, that is, the most unscrupulous, eventually have warehouses and banks, and move into the most splendid mansions in the cities, provided that they don't get in each other's way, as in the narrow ghettos of the East. That's why they try to escape to rich lands with rich people. They need other.
So in the next part of the film, there's something else that's done implicitly. So you'll see a globe, and then there's spread of migration, and the underlying metaphor there is again the spread of disease.
Peoples because they need the wares with which to do business. What creative Aryan peoples find of value has been reduced by the Jew to mere merchandise. He buys and sells, but produces nothing. The production he leaves to the workers and farmers of the host nation.
It's funny there's an echo of Marxist ideology in there too that's very interesting, because what the insistence is that the labor that goes into basic production qualifies as labor, but the labor that goes into mercantile activity doesn't qualify as labor at all. It's not like the Nazis were pro-capitalist by any stretch of the imagination. So there's this strange distinction drawn between, like, it's almost like physical production. That seems to be something that's valued. It's the use of your musculature, say. But then as soon as it's elevated up into trade, which is obviously a value-added process, I mean, that's almost self-evident, but it's put forward here as something that's only parasitical. That's right. And that's a commonality with the Marxism of the time.
The Jews are a people without farmers or workers, a race of parasites. Wherever the body of a nation shows a wound, they anchor themselves and feed on the decaying organism. They make business out of the sickness of the nations, and therefore endeavor to deepen and prolong all conditions of sickness. That's how it is in Poland and was in Germany. The Jews have been this way throughout their entire history. Their faces bear the age-old features of the perpetual sponger, the eternal Jew, who, in the course of time and worldwide wanderings, has always been the same. There's no difference between these Jews in Poland and those in Palestine, though the two are geographically separated. Palestine is the spiritual center of international Jewry, though the Jews are numerically insignificant there. Here at the Wailing Wall, they gather and mourn the fall of Jerusalem. Their homelessness, though, is a matter of choice, and in keeping with their entire history. 4,000 years ago, their Hebrew ancestors were already wandering. Out of the land of two rivers, they wandered along the sea to Egypt, where they ran a lucrative grain business for a while. When the country farmers and other Egyptians rose against the foreign usurers and speculators, they wandered once more and plundered their way to the Promised Land. They settled there, mercilessly looting the culturally superior rightful inhabitants. Here, in the course of centuries, from the Oriental Far Eastern racial mixture with Negroid admixture, the ultimate mongrelized Jews developed. Foreign from us Europeans born of totally different racial elements, they differ from us in body and above all in soul. We probably would never have been bothered by them had they stayed in their Oriental home. But the cosmopolitan empire of Alexander the Great, reaching from the Near East across half the Mediterranean, and especially the boundless world empire of the Romans, brought about the evolution of the trade and migratory traits of the Jews, who soon spread across the open Mediterranean area. While some of them settled in the large urban traffic and trade centers of the Mediterranean, others wandered relentlessly on across Spain, France, southern Germany, and England. Everywhere, they made themselves unwelcome. In Spain and France, the people rose openly against them in the 13th and 14th centuries. and they wandered on, mainly to Germany. There they followed the path of the Aryan culture, creative Germans colonizing the East, till they finally found a gigantic new untapped reservoir in the Polish and Russian sections of Eastern Europe.
So, well, let's tie that together. We talked about the use of archetypes in stories. We talked about the relationship between archetypal symbolism and the biological underpinnings of the human psyche. And then you can see that manifesting itself in this sort of propaganda and the political positions that come out of it. You tap into the archetypal dimension. That's chaos versus order. You can place one against the other however you want from a propagandistic perspective, because you could make a film decrying excessive order. That's not a difficult thing to do, but that isn't what happens here. Order is associated with the sun and with what's good and with honest labor and with purity and with health, and chaos is associated with decay and disgust and impurity, and also with trade, which is extremely interesting. And the trade dynamic, you could see that in the second part of the film there. There was the implication that it was involvement in trade that was associated with this pathological spread, right? And so trade, that's another reflection of the ambivalence towards the transgression of borders. Is trade a good thing or is it a bad thing? Well, that's always a political issue. It's a huge political issue right now, right? You're going to have internationalist trade, or you're going to close the borders. You're going to have internationalist trade and open it, or you're going to close the borders. And so the degree to which the border should be open or closed, I think, generally speaking, is the prime political question. And of course, we're going through an absolute convulsion of that sort of argumentation again right now. Part of the reason I wanted to show you this, I mean, there's a variety of reasons. I wanted to show you how the archetype and the underlying biology are tightly associated, but I also wanted to show you how those associations can be hijacked, essentially, and used for propagandistic and political purposes, because you need to know that, because these sorts of things have they have the capacity for a very powerful emotional appeal. And the only possible way of resisting that, I would say, and avoiding the temptation of allowing extraordinarily complex issues to be catastrophically reduced to principles that are far too simple to do them justice, is to become at least aware to some degree of what the mechanisms for the production of such propaganda are and why they have such potency. Then you have at least some ghost of a chance of reducing your own, what would you call it, proclivity. We could even call it a temperamental proclivity to the kind of propagandistic information that happens to suit your temperament best. So, well, we all know the aftermath of this sort of thing, right? It was absolutely dreadful, and we're by no means out of the woods on that yet. You know, you see in Europe and in the United States increasingly calls for the nationalistic enclosure of borders again. You saw that with Trump and the building of the wall between Mexico and the United States. So these things can get very badly out of hand, and it's a very bad idea to allow things to swing too far to one way or too far to the other, because all hell breaks loose when you do that. And well, all right, we'll see you on Thursday.